All right, thank you everyone for being here for the next edition of our One World Mind seminar. Special thank you to our speaker, Alex Safsten. Thank you for being here. He'll talk to us about spatio-temporal population dynamics for interacting species. So Alex, take it away.
Thank you for the invitation, Christian, and for the other organizers for putting this together. I'm going to talk today about two problems of interacting species. The first problem will be a predator-prey problem. It'll be a PDE in mismatched domains. And then the other problem will be mostly an ODE for mosquito population control. I'll explain what I mean by mostly an ODE a little bit later. So for predator-prey in mismatched domains, what that means is the predators in this model will live in a subdomain of the prey. So we think of in this picture, I've called them omega 1 and omega 2 throughout the rest of the math of this presentation to make sure that it's consistent with the notation we settled on for our paper. It'll be the prey live in omega 1, or excuse me, omega, a large domain, and the predators live in a smaller domain inside of omega. The idea is that if the predators were to allow themselves to live in the entire domain omega, they would overhunt the prey, and then both species would go extinct. But if the predators lived in a very small domain within omega, then there wouldn't be enough prey in that domain to support a large population. So perhaps somewhere in the middle there is an optimal domain for the predators to live in, a best domain, and we need to be able to understand what the size and shape of that domain is. So this has some real world application. For one, there are these internationally recognized areas in the ocean called marine protected areas, or MPAs. And the fish can swim in and out of MPAs freely. But fishermen cannot fish in MPAs. It is illegal. And having these MPAs benefits everyone. The fish have a safe haven, so there's a higher population of fish. And the fishermen do not exhaust their resources, so they don't drive the fish populations to extinction, or at least to local extinction. Uh, but of course, if we made the MPAs cover too much area, we wouldn't be able to harvest enough fish to support populations that depend on that fish. So the question is, how big should the MPAs be to maximize the long-term fishing harvest? One other application of this work is in evolutionary biology, particularly wolves and other animals that are highly territorial. Wolves, because of their fierce territoriality, if rival wolf packs meet each other, they will fight each other, and oftentimes that'll leave wolves dead. So for that reason, wolf packs, not only do they not venture into other wolves' territories, they don't even often venture to the edge of their own territories, because then they might meet a wolf pack on the edge of the neighboring territory, and then they would fight each other, and some wolves would die. And to make it even safer, they'll usually leave a bit of a buffer between their territories, an area where no wolves hunt and the prey live free. And so this leads to an evolutionary biology question, which is this fierce territoriality of wolves a feature, not a bug, in the sense that they kill each other so that they enforce a buffer zone leading to more prey for all the wolves? If they didn't have the buffer zone, they would overhunt their prey, and there would be a lower wolf population as a result. Perhaps that's the question. So central to the model that I'm going to present is the Ali effect. So a typical population growth model might look something like the logistic growth model, which I've written here. The time derivative P sub t equals f of p, just a simple ODE. Population p depends on this growth function f of p. And the logistic growth function is p times 1 minus p, which says that if your population is really small or really big, your population grows slowly. If your population is somewhere in the middle, it will grow quickly, but the population always grows. The Ali effect is a biological phenomenon which leads to small populations actually decreasing. So a model of the Ali effect might be the time derivative of p sub t, is p times p minus a times 1 minus p. And I've shown a graph of what that looks like below. The logistic growth in blue and the Ali effect growth in orange where now for low population, uh, for low populations, the population actually shrinks in time. And now the extinction state, p equals 0, is asymptotically stable. There's a few reasons biologically why this might happen. Some animals have obligate sociality, which means that they must live in large social groups. Think ants and meerkats, even humans. And if we reduce the population enough, the social structure that they depend on to live isn't there anymore, and the population will die, even if we do still have a few of the individuals left that could potentially breed. Another possibility is mate limitation. Usually, if a population of animals goes extinct, this is the reason why. We might have a handful of male and females that could mate and produce a next generation of an endangered species, but if they're scattered over a wide territory, they may not be able to find each other quickly enough to be able to mate and produce that next generation before they die. And so this is another example of an LE effect. One other example would be a population that relies on cooperative defense, like schooling fish and flocking birds, where they really need to live in large groups to survive being hunted by predators. And we're not going to specify in this model what the mechanism of the LE effect is, just that there is one. The model looks like this. So we model U and V, the prey and predator population densities respectively. We will use a growth function, f of u, for the prey that includes the LE effect. So f of u is a function of one variable, and f of 0 equals 0, f of 1 equals 0, and there's another root, f of theta equals 0, theta somewhere between 0 and 1. And we're not going to specify a precise form of f, just that it is a smooth function with these properties. The model, which I show here displayed, includes diffusion. I've written those terms in green, so both the predators and the prey diffuse in their respective domains. The purple term in the prey equation is the growth term. The f of u, the prey grow according to this growth function. Then minus gamma v is the death of predators. They die off naturally at a linear rate. And then finally, the last terms in red are the predation terms. So we've got this 1 sub a. This is an indicator function indicating that the predation only happens in the subset A of omega. And then the simple predation is just linear in both u and v. And then the predators, in turn, benefit from that predation with this alpha uv term. On the boundaries of both domains A and omega, we have homogeneous non-boundary conditions, just no flux. Okay, so maybe the first question we should ask ourselves is, are there equilibria to this model? And I've reproduced the model here at the top. Well, and of course, there are some trivial equilibria. We can have uv equals 0, 0, so that's no predators, no prey, nothing interesting going on. We can have uv equals theta 0, so that is the prey live at their alley threshold and there's no predators, and that is an unstable equilibrium, because if we have a little more prey or a little less prey, they will either move to their carrying capacity or die out, depending on which way they're perturbed. And finally, we have the 1-0 equilibrium, where the prey are at maximum carrying capacity, the maximum density of prey, and still no predators. So notice that all these trivial equilibria have no predators. And so the question we want to ask is, can we add predators to an equilibrium? Can we have an equilibrium where there's both predators and prey? Does this even exist mathematically? And then if so, it makes sense, at least from a biological standpoint, that the prey in this coexistence equilibrium should be bounded below by a so-called worst case scenario solution, zeta. And so I've written the PDE for zeta here, but essentially what this means is that zeta is only in the predator-free domain, omega minus a, and it represents a population of prey where if they wander into the predator's domain, they will get immediately killed and eaten by the predators. So the population density on the boundary of the predator and prey domains is 0. The prey are just immediately killed when they enter the predator domain. This is the worst case scenario for the prey, right? They can't survive at all in the predator domain. Because it's the worst case scenario, we would expect any coexistence equilibrium to be bounded below by zeta. Okay, well, are there even non-trivial solutions for zeta? And in fact, there are. So our first theorem is that there exists a radius r bigger than 0, so that if omega minus a contains a ball of radius r, there's a big ball sitting in the predator-free zone, then there must exist a non-trivial positive solution zeta to this equation. So this means that the worst case for the prey is a sustainable situation as long as the predator-free zone is big enough. If we give the prey enough breathing room so they can proliferate and reproduce without fear of being hunted, then they can still survive being hunted on the boundary of that predator-free domain. And we'll call R the worst case scenario radius. So this, by the way, this theorem, I haven't attached our names to this theorem because we did not prove this theorem. This is actually a classical result for bistable reaction diffusion equations. But the next result is something that we proved. By the way, my collaborators Henri Barasticki and Bill Fagan worked with me on this. So for this theorem, we need the death rate gamma is less than the birth rate alpha for predators, and then if the predator-free domain contains that ball of radius r, the worst case scenario radius, then there exists an equilibrium solution to the model with predators positive and prey somewhere between that worst case scenario solution zeta and the carrying capacity 1 non-constant. So the idea of the proof here, which is based on the theory of topological degree. So essentially, we formulate the problem of equilibria for this model as a fixed point problem for a nonlinear operator G. And the tricky part is to determine a domain for G so that G maps the domain to itself, and it has to, of course, have a fixed point in there, but also make sure that G does not have a fixed point anywhere on the boundary of the domain. And we also, of course, have to make sure that this domain satisfies the properties that we want the solutions to have, namely V is bigger than 0 and U is between zeta and 1. But once we've got that nonlinear operator and the domain, we can construct a homotopy from G to another operator, G prime, which is the corresponding nonlinear operator for the worst case scenario problem. Now, the worst case scenario problem is a lot simpler because, if I can recall, it is not a system. It is just a single PDE, uncoupled to any other PDE. Much easier to establish existence. In fact, this theorem already establishes existence of solutions. And in particular, the topological degree of the nonlinear operator for that problem is 1. A topological degree, okay, we don't need to get into the specifics of what that is if you're not familiar, but it has to do with the character of the solution, or how the operator acts nearby fixed point solutions. And so if the operator has no fixed point solutions, its degree will be 0. But if the operator has at least one fixed point solution, or excuse me, if the degree is non-zero, it will have at least one fixed point solution. And so we can calculate the degree of the worst case scenario operator to be 1, so it has a solution, and therefore by the property that the topological degree is preserved by homotopy, the original problem also has a fixed point solution, which means we have our non-trivial equilibrium. That basically concludes what we can do analytically with this model. Maybe in the future we will do more, but most of the remainder of my results are numerical. But I think that they're also equally interesting. So to start, we're going to look in the 1D setting. And in this setting, the prey domain omega will just be an interval 0L, and the predator domain will be a smaller interval 0 to A. We'll take a look at the total populations, which are the integrals of the population densities on the respective domains, and take a look at the dynamics. So if A is small, meaning that the predators have only a very small region to live in, the solutions appear to approach a stable equilibrium, and we hypothesize that this is the equilibrium whose existence we just proved. So on the pictures on the left, we're looking at total population, which after a little bit of oscillation settles down on an equilibrium. And on the right, we're seeing what that equilibrium actually is with the spatial variable on the x-axis and then population density on the vertical axis. And we can see the predators have a population density that is non-zero up until about x equals 0.44 or so, and then it drops down to 0 because there are no predators in the predator-free part of the domain. And of course, the prey like to live in the predator-free part of the domain, with fewer prey living in the areas where they're hunted, obviously. Well, what if we move up to intermediate values of A? So here's an A that is a little bit bigger, and we see that now the total population doesn't approach an equilibrium, but it approaches a limit cycle. So somewhere between this small a and intermediate A, we have a Hopf bifurcation and a limit cycle where we see kind of the standard Lotka-Volterra type oscillations happening, where we have large amounts of prey, which leads to large amounts of predators, which leads to small amounts of prey, which leads to small amounts of predators, and the cycle continues. If we increase A little bit more to large A, the populations both approach extinction. So the predators immediately their population grows, but they drive the prey beneath the alley threshold. The prey go extinct and the predators go extinct too. So we can capture all three of these behaviors by graphing something that I call the limiting average population. So I take that total population, I integrate it from 0 to capital T, and divide by capital T to get an average total population over from time 0 to time capital T. And then I take a limit as capital T goes to infinity. And I've graphed here an approximation of that quantity. And so what we're looking here on the horizontal axis, we shouldn't think of this as the spatial variable. This is instead that parameter A, which tells us what is the boundary between the predator domain and the predator-free domain. And as that parameter A increases from 0 up to, in this case, 1, which would be the total size of the prey domain, we see first the total predator population increases. So a bigger domain in this case leads to more and more predators up until a certain point at about A equals 0.42. We reach a maximum predator population. From then on, the predator population begins to decrease. Having more territory actually leads to fewer predators. At about A equals 0.66, the curve appears to be non-differentiable. Something funky is happening, and that is the Hopf bifurcation occurring. So after this point, we no longer approach a stable equilibrium, but instead approach a limit cycle. The population, though, continues to decrease. The long time average population continues to decrease until about A equals 0.8, when the populations crash. So this is actually appears to be a discontinuity. The crash is sudden. This is a particularly scary feature of this graph because it means that the predators if they're very close to that extinction point where the crash happens, they think we're getting food, we're able to hunt lots of prey. Maybe things will improve if we hunt a little bit more prey. So they extend their territory a little bit, and then suddenly the prey go extinct. And so we could think of this if this was, for instance, fishermen and fishing in close to a marine protected area. It's possible that if they decided to violate the law a little bit and just go a little bit into that marine protected area, fish a little more, they might, if they're not very mindful of the prey population densities and what exactly the alley threshold is, they might accidentally cause the fish population to crash without even realizing it. They think the fish population is fine; it's well above a scary level, but then suddenly they cause a crash, and we can't necessarily see it coming. An interesting feature of this graph is that the predator population does not go to zero as A goes to zero. If you look on the left-hand side of the orange curve, it doesn't go to zero. It means that even if the predator population, or even if the predators are confined to a very small region, the population of predators isn't small. So they must have very large population density. The population density, in fact, blows up as A goes to zero. So we have one more analytic result, which is that this v hat curve, the average total population curve, is continuously differentiable for small a, and it has the following asymptotic expansion. So we have a constant term, and then a linear term, and then of course we should have plus order a squared. Where these coefficients of the constant and linear terms have these derivatives in them, the derivatives of W1 and W2 at zero, where W1 and W2 solve those given PDEs. Okay, so what does this all mean? Well, if you want to go through the trouble of actually solving those PDEs, you'll see that depending on the parameter values, that this linear coefficient in equation 2 could be positive or negative, depending on the parameters. In fact, and we haven't proved this yet, but our conjecture based on numerical experiments is that the sign of the derivative of v hat is equal to the sign of gamma minus theta. So that is the death rate of predators divided by the birth rate of predators minus the alley threshold, plus something that gets small as the prey domain becomes big. And so we can see this happening in graphs. And so the graph that I'm showing you here is, again, that v hat function for different parameter values. And in this v hat function, I've got theta is 0.3. That's the alley threshold. And then gamma over alpha, which is the death rate over birth rate of predators, is 0.2. So the gamma over alpha minus theta is negative. And indeed, what we see is that the derivative of the orange curve at 0 is also negative. This indicates that the predators in this situation are actually better off if they limit themselves to a tiny domain. Think of fishermen, once again, this time on a lake, who are better off standing on the shore and fishing rather than getting in their boats and moving all over the lake and fishing the entire lake. They're better off if they just limit themselves to standing on the shore. Because if they try to fish the entire lake, they will overfish the population and they'll soon have no fish left to catch. If we change this scenario to, instead of gamma over alpha is less than theta, change it to gamma over alpha equals theta, and I did not change it in the text, but here both gamma over alpha and theta are both 0.3. We see that now the derivative of the orange curve is approximately equal to 0 on the left-hand side. And now now gamma over alpha is bigger than theta, and we see that that there's a positive derivative. The kind of noisiness you see over on the right side of the graph, that's due to the Hopf bifurcation and difficulty in measuring average population when there's oscillations going on. But this goes to show that if predators are very efficient, it means gamma over small. They can hunt well enough that they have a high birth rate. And so efficient predators should limit themselves to a small territory, whereas inefficient predators should allow themselves to take up a larger territory. We've done some numerical experiments in 2D. This is very much ongoing work. It's a bit more tricky numerically speaking. But this is an example of a 2D solution. So in this problem, the predators are occupying a flower, like a 3-petal shape inside the unit disk, and the unit disk is where the prey live. We see that higher population densities, which are indicated by the light colors, are focused around the petals of the flower, so around where the predator population is kind of thinnest. this is ongoing work, but we would like to better understand how the shape of the predator domain influences their population density and their total population, and do shape optimization, which leads to our future work. We'd like to get a better handle on the uniqueness of solutions, the existence of optimal solutions or optimal domain sizes for the predators, and this Hoff bifurcation, which we have observed numerically. It's difficult to prove its existence analytically, but it's something we'd like to look into. As far as numerical work, shape optimization in 2D would be excellent, and to be able to recover some of what is observed in wolf populations, if we can say that our model backs up these observed buffer zones between wolf territories, that would be a great justification. So I'm going to switch gears at this point and move on to my second topic, which is, although on a much different idea, is still interacting species and PDEs. So this is about the sterile insect technique. The sterile insect technique for mosquitoes involves breeding a bunch of mosquitoes in a special lab. You separate out the male mosquitoes and sterilize them with radiation. Then you can release them, perhaps with a drone, over a wide area. And now you've got in the wild, females can choose between sterile and wild males, and they might choose one of the sterile males. Of course, the female doesn't know that this male is sterile, and that if she mates with a sterile male, she will lay eggs that can never hatch. And this could lead to a reduction in the mosquito population. It actually has been very successful in eliminating, at least locally, several pests such as the screwworm fly, the Mediterranean fruit fly. A great target for this type of work would be the Anopheles mosquito, which carries malaria. Um, so the goal of this work is to model SIT being used on Anopheles mosquitoes and develop strategies to make the SIT process as efficient as possible. I'll get into what I mean by that a little bit later. So first, I'll present a model that is just a natural mosquito population model with no human intervention. It has 6 compartments. Mosquitoes have 4 life stages, so they're laid as eggs. So the E is the egg stage. With in blue, I've highlighted the nonlinear logistic growth term. Then when the eggs hatch, they are larvae and they live in water. So that's the L term. And again, I have highlighted in blue the nonlinear interlarval competition term. So the larvae have to compete with each other for resources in the ponds and the puddles and the buckets and the overturned tires and stuff that they live in. After a few weeks as larvae, they turn into pupae that are stationary and they still live in the water. And then the pupae hatch into adults. They could be females, which we denote as F sub U, that is for females unmated, or they could be males, which we denote as M. The unmated females will mate. I've highlighted the mating term in blue, and become mated females, which is F sub M. So some results. We have solutions to this model that start in the first orthant, stay in the first orthant, and are bounded for all time. So that's at least we don't have unbounded mosquito populations going up forever. The growth rate, or the basic reproduction number for this model is given here. And there is a saddle node bifurcation at r naught equals 1. This is perhaps the first surprising thing. Typically, when we see a bifurcation at r naught equals 1, this is a transcritical bifurcation. So this means that if the basic reproduction number is too small, less than 1, the population cannot reproduce fast enough to overcome whatever is killing them. In this case, just natural death of mosquitoes. And they die off. And so the trivial zero equilibrium is stable. And then at R naught equals 1, there's a transcritical bifurcation. So a family of non-trivial equilibria branches away from the trivial equilibrium, and it becomes stable. As R naught is bigger than 1, the population can reproduce fast enough to sustain itself. This problem, however, has a saddle node bifurcation, which indicates that there are actually two non-trivial equilibria and an alley effect. This is induced by the mating term. So this is a mate limitation alley effect, where if there's not very many mosquitoes, the males and the females cannot find each other fast enough to reproduce. They will die before they can find each other. And it indicates that if R naught is less than 1, that is the only equilibrium, and it is globally stable. Well, that's a separate proof, but it is globally stable, and all solutions lead to death for mosquitoes. But if R naught is bigger than 1, then there are actually two other equilibria. We call them X star and X double star. X star is stable and is large. It is about the size of the carrying capacity in terms of how many mosquitoes we have. And it is stable. The other equilibrium X star is very small and it is unstable. We call this the alley equilibrium, and it represents the alley threshold. Unfortunately for us humans, R naught is typically quite big, on the order of like 30 or 40, based on parameters that we have from laboratory experiments and field experiments. So mosquitoes aren't going anywhere anytime soon unless we do something about it. If we take a look at this natural model and its solutions, this is what a typical solution looks like. All the compartments of the model simply approach that X star stable non-trivial equilibrium. Now let's add in some human intervention in the form of SIT. So we'll take our 6-compartment model and add 2 more compartments. We don't change the aquatic stages, ELP, but we do change the other 3, and like I said, we add 2 more. We have now the MS compartment, which stands for sterile males. Where sterile males can die at a linear rate, but they're also introduced by humans at this rate R of t. Then we have females that have mated with sterile males, and we make that distinct from females who have mated with wild males. And we add the effect of sterile males into the mating terms. We also add whatever you see sterile males in the mating term. It is attached to this parameter eta, which is a reduction in fitness for the sterile males when you expose them to radiation. It makes them sterile, but it also messes with their body in some other ways. I mean, no one would want to get exposed to that much radiation, and I'm sure the mosquitoes don't either. But it means that they're a little bit less favorable to the females, and so we usually assume that eta is about 0.75, so about 75% as fit as the wild males. The release rate we will add could either be a continuous function, or it could be something like a Dirac comb, where we model a release of a large number of sterile males over a very short time scale, which is more realistic. The labs that produce these males might release several thousand sterile male mosquitoes over the course of a few minutes, maybe once or twice a week. For the purposes of this presentation, I'm going to stick to a continuous function, though. So here's what a typical solution might look like for this model, or as it does look like. This is a solution that spans the course of 4 years. So for the first year, I'm not going to release any sterile males. I just let the population get to its natural X star equilibrium. Then I start releasing sterile males, and I release them at a rate of 20 times the carrying capacity every week. The the population responds by reducing. Each of the compartments reduces by about a third. I do that for 2 years, and I see that I'm kind of approaching a new equilibrium. Finally, I stopped doing SIT after 2 years, just to see what impact I've had. And it turns out I've had no lasting impact because the population just goes right back to its stable X star equilibrium. So that's not good. It means that I have to do this very expensive SIT program forever, or I'm not going to have any lasting impact on the mosquito population. Moreover, I have to do quite a lot of SIT. Look at the vertical axis for this plot shows that the total female population, which is the purple curve on top here, is a little bit less than twice the carrying capacity. That's the carrying capacity for eggs, right? So however many eggs I can lay in my environment, I have about twice as many females flying around. If I release 20 times the carrying capacity of sterile males. So for every female, I have now 20 males that have been sterilized. I can reduce the population of females by about a third. That is very depressing, because that's very expensive to produce that many sterile males. So hence the goal of this project is to find more efficient strategies to reduce the number of males that I have to release, and also be able to have a lasting impact on the mosquito population, not just be able to reduce it while I am actively trying to kill these mosquitoes. So I do another numerical experiment, and this time I am looking at different release rates, starting from 0 times the carrying capacity up to 40 times the carrying capacity. And in this graph, I'm showing only the total females for each release rate. And so obviously, if I release 0 males, I have no impact on the population. That's the top blue curve. But then the more sterile males I release, the more impact I have. And then suddenly, if I release enough, I can actually drive the population to extinction. Moreover, I drive them beneath the alley threshold. So if I stop doing SIT after they have gone beneath the alley threshold, they will stay extinct. They will never come back. This gives us an idea for how we can make this process more efficient, in that I can find the best release rate that minimizes the number of sterile males that I have to release. So what's going on here is that there is a saddle node bifurcation, and this is a different saddle node bifurcation from the one I mentioned earlier. But on the x-axis here, I have the release rate starting from 0 to 30 times the carrying capacity every week, and then on the vertical axis, I have the sum of the populations of all stages at the 3 equilibria. So 0 is obviously down here at 0. The X star equilibrium is in orange, starting from the top and working its way down. And then the X double star equilibrium starts at the bottom and works its way up. It looks like X double star converges with 0, but they actually don't meet here. They're very close to each other, but they don't meet. This shows that if I release enough sterile males, I can actually remove the other equilibria, and now all solutions have to follow the gray arrow here down to extinction. And this is a good this is good news for us. By the way, this is new result as of yesterday. I didn't have time to put a slide together about it, but I actually have a nice formulation for what this not optimal but critical release rate is, to achieve the saddle node bifurcation. So we could ask ourselves, if I'm going to be releasing, I'm going to go back to the previous slide. If I'm going to be releasing a large number of sterile males somewhere beyond the saddle node bifurcation, to the right of the bifurcation, how many should I release? If I release too few, then I'm going to actually be to the left of the bifurcation, and I'll never drive the wild mosquitoes to extinction. But if I'm too far to the right, if I go too crazy with the release rate, I'll just be releasing too many mosquitoes to have an effect. There'll be diminishing returns. on my investment. So somewhere in the middle, there's an optimal release rate, and numerically determined here. That release rate, for at least for these parameters, which again we're using parameters measured in the lab and in the field to model the population dynamics of mosquitoes, appears to be about 30 times the carrying capacity per week. This blue curve shows the total number of sterile males that I need to release to drive the wild population beneath the alley threshold. I reach a minimum here at just over 30, maybe 31. This, by the way, has very good agreement with what the standard protocol is for SIT in the handbooks for how to do SIT. They say to release about 10 times the carrying capacity, or excuse me, 10 times the wild population every week. And since the wild population is about 3 times the carrying capacity, it works out to be about the same. This, however, may not be the best strategy. If I go back again to the previous slide, a better strategy might be to start over here on the right side of the bifurcation point, where I have a high wild population. So I'm at the top right of the graph. I have a high release rate. I drive the population down, and then I can start decreasing my release rate. And as long as I stay beneath the green curve, I'll stay underneath the alley threshold. And eventually I can reach a point where I can stop doing SIT. And this allows me to not always be releasing at a high constant release rate, and I might be able to get away with releasing fewer sterile males. So I did that. This is not optimal control. That's an entirely different topic, which Christian and I have talked about, and someday we'll get around to that. This is just me playing around looking for a proof of concept here, and I found an example of a release rate that starts high. That's the orange curve starts high and then decreases, and I can drive the wild population to extinction with about 27% fewer sterile males than with a constant release rate. And with an optimal control, we could do even better. But there's an important observation here. And that is that not all mosquitoes are deadly. In fact, most aren't. There's about 200, 250 species of Anopheles mosquitoes. And there's 2 other genus of mosquitoes that don't spread malaria at all. But of those 250 Anopheles mosquitoes, only about 40 spread malaria, and only 3 spread it really well. And so most mosquitoes don't spread malaria, are not dangerous to humans, and yet they compete with the malaria-carrying mosquitoes for resources. This is in contrast to other pests, where if, for example, there is a fly that keeps eating all of your grapes in your vineyard, if you use some kind of pest control program to eliminate the fly, but then there is another species of fly that also eats those grapes, you have to eliminate the other species of fly as well. But with mosquitoes, if there is one species that carries malaria and another that doesn't, and one of them, but they both compete for resources, you don't have to eliminate both species. Just the malaria-carrying species will do. Sure, the other species might still bite your arm and make your arm itchy, but it's not going to kill you. So we could potentially take advantage of competition from a second species that has low vectorial capacity, meaning that it cannot carry malaria very well, and maybe replace the population of malaria-carrying mosquitoes with this low species. So we again update the model with a second species. Now we have competition in the egg-laying terms and in the larval terms. So the 2 species, A and B, A carries malaria, B does not. And they compete for space to lay eggs, and they also compete as larvae for food inside the ponds and stuff where they live. We'll assume that there's plenty of blood to go around, so they don't compete as adults. Each species has its separate parameters. They have different maturation rates, different mortality rates, mating rates, etc. But we have to assume that the good species, the non-malaria carrying species B, is disadvantaged in some way. Otherwise, it already would be outcompeting the malaria species. We'll assume that it has higher mortality rates, lower maturation rates, just so that its population is disadvantaged. In fact, we're going to make it disadvantaged by 5%. So if a parameter, if a we will make all of the parameters either 5% bigger or 5% lower, depending on which one is less helpful for that species. And here's the result. We spend, again, 1 year to let species A, the bad species, get to its natural equilibrium. Then we do a one-time introduction of species B, just a small number of species B. And at the same time, we start doing SIT on species A. And so species B initially starts to die out because species A can easily outcompete it. But then the SIT starts to take effect, and species B compete species A. And eventually, species B can replace species A at a lower level because it's not as efficient as species B, or excuse me, as species A. But the key here is that we can do this whole process with much less SIT. We need only 3% as many sterile males to make this happen in the optimal case as we did for the one species model. And this is just fantastic, much more efficient. We can take this one step further and do a PDE model. So now we're going to add a diffusion term to each of the compartments in the model. Excuse me, only the adult compartments. The juvenile stages don't move around very much, so we'll just assume that they stay stationary. The adults will all diffuse at their own rates, and they will still compete between the two species. And here is the scenario that I modeled. So suppose that we are at an interface where, due to changes in the landscape or the climate or whatever, the species B does well in the west side of this plot on the left, and species A does well on the right. I'm at the interface of the territory of two distinct species. We can now conduct SIT right at the interface between those two species and lead an invasion of the benign mosquitoes into the dangerous mosquitoes territory. So in this simulation, I'm going to spend 6 years getting the populations to their equilibrium, with species A being dominant on the right, species B dominant on the left. I start SIT right at the interface, and then I watch as the SIT allows species B to invade species A. And notice that I really only have to focus my SIT right at the interface. I don't have to do SIT over the entire spatial landscape. Only at the interface will do, and allow me to lead the invasion. And after 8 years, the species B has replaced species A over this entire 200-kilometer territory. So we're pretty happy with the level of efficiency we've achieved. We've got a model that has some pretty well understood equilibria and dynamics, and we can use various strategies to reduce the wild malaria-carrying mosquito species at varying levels of efficiency. But in particular, this interspecies competition seems to work really well. An SIT can allow a disadvantaged but not so dangerous species to invade a malaria-carrying species and replace it in a territory. Of course, there's still work to do on this project. We'd like to model temperature dependence because mosquitoes are very sensitive to temperature, and that would allow us to model the annual dynamics of mosquitoes when it's warm and when it's cooler. Rainfall also makes a big difference because it means there's more territory for them to breed. And so that would allow us to have some more accurate models of what's going on in the territories where mosquitoes are actually a big issue. And of course, we'd like to do optimal control of SIT to understand how should we tune our control parameters so that we can release as few sterile males as possible and still eliminate the wild mosquito population. And of course, we want to do all of this in two spatial dimensions, which is a much more accurate representation of what's really going on in the world than the 1D model. That concludes my talk. Do I have any questions?
Thank you very much, Alex, for a really, really interesting talk. I'll give a round of applause for all of us. Yeah, and, does anybody have any questions they'd like to ask? I have several. I had written down optimal control and underlined it 5 times while you were talking about the
Sure.
different the R of T, the introduction of sterile